get this going. So, one second here. I'm just going to pull up. Oops. Perfect. So, good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Kaufman with the Niagara-on-the-Lake Museum here to welcome you to our last virtual lecture of 2023. We have had a great lineup of lectures, and I'm sure you will enjoy this one today as well. We will be recording today's lecture and uploading it to our YouTube channel. So if for any reason you can't stay for the whole talk, you will be sent the link to the recording. And as always, there will be time for questions at the end, so feel free to use the chat box and the Q&A functions. And if you want to support our free lecture series, other programming, or our collections, I will post a link in the chat box shortly where you can make a donation to the Niagara-on-the-Lake Museum. Today, we have our very special speaker, Shawna, who holds an honors BA in anthropology from the University of Guelph and an advanced diploma in applied museum studies at Algonquin College. She has been working in the cultural and heritage field since 2012 and has worked in small and large institutions across Canada. Shawna is presently the assistant curator and education programmer at the Niagara-on-the-Lake Museum. When she is not researching, helping to curate an exhibition, or giving a lecture, you can find her with a pencil in her hair, which is true, for sure, and surrounded by books, artifacts, and documents from the museum's extensive collection. In addition to being the chair of the Museums of Niagara Association, she is also involved in the OMA's Regional Museum Network, Algonquin College's Applied Museum Studies Program Advisory Committee, and the 2024 Canadian Museum Association National Conference Committee. And today we're going to hear her talk today on the historically hysterical, a look at women's health and healthcare. So I will turn it over to you, Shawna.
Thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. Now, I did give this talk as part of our 2023 in-person lecture series, but it coincided with the May long weekend, and I know many wanted to attend, but were unable to make it. There has also been a lot of interest by women's groups within the region to have this recorded so it can be shared widely. So we did decide to include this as part of our virtual lecture series this year. If you are joining me for a second time, there are some edits to it and maybe some new facts just to keep it a little bit fresh. Before I begin, I do want to warn you that this talk is a little bit of a roller coaster. There's a lot of information, a lot of complex issues that we have today that are very much rooted in history. There may be humorous moments with some occasional absurdities. There will be times that your jaw might hit the floor, and that's okay. Don't worry, we can't see you. And there may be some moments of anger, and I want you to be able to feel what you're feeling and have these experiences. Put these comments in the chat and ask some questions. I will be happy to answer them as best as I can at the end of the presentation. My interest in this subject came over the last few years, largely thanks to videos of women sharing their experiences on social media. I know a millennial on social media, it's, absurd, right? And as much as we might roll our eyes at social media like Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, I really think that it has helped bring the issue of inequalities in medical research, practice, and knowledge to our attention. Headlines like, let's see if I can get this going. There we go. Women are more likely to wait longer for health diagnosis and to be told it's all in their head. Diagnostic errors can cause fatalities in the US. Misdiagnosis could have led to Calgary woman's multi-million-dollar lawsuit. 3 women were dismissed by doctors and told they were suffering from women's issues. They had things like endometriosis and cancer. And from our own backyard, this woman went to the hospital with back pain and died, and now her family wants answers from Niagara Health. But when seeing these articles and social media posts, I kept asking myself, why? Why is this happening? What is the root cause of these issues that have resulted in ingrained biases, gaslighting, and inequalities in women's health and access to healthcare. And what I found and will be sharing with you today is that medicine has a very serious gender problem because throughout history, women's health has often been defined and inhibited by one organ, the uterus. Throughout this lecture, I too will be defining women's health based on a person having this organ, because that is unfortunately how it has historically been done in Western medicine. But today we recognize that sex and biology does not define one's gender or how a person chooses to identify, and our healthcare system has been treating transgender and gender diverse people unfairly. But unfortunately, that is another issue for another time. I wish I could say for this talk that we only have to go back a couple of hundred years and explore these ingrained biases in the care, treatment, and diagnosis of people with a uterus. But unfortunately, we are having to go back millennia. In ancient times, people used to attribute sickness to superstitious beliefs, magic, and the wrath of the gods. But then came a man named Hippocrates, and he believed and taught that medicine should be practiced as a scientific discipline based on natural sciences. Hippocrates revolutionized medicine in ancient Greece, not only with this concept, but he also established the first known medical school so that others could learn how to diagnose, prevent, and treat diseases. Today, there are roughly 60 medical documents that have survived and are attributed to Hippocrates, and they have been gathered into a collection known as the Hippocratic Corpus. Now, you might be thinking, Hippocrates, Hippocratic Oath. Yes, they do go hand in hand with each other. But Hippocrates didn't actually author all of the documents in the corpus. Scholars have identified that the writings do span several hundred years, and they are believed to be authored by those he inspired, and the authors are collectively known as the Hippocratics. These works, which were written by men for male physicians, include a range of beliefs about the body, treatment option, medical skills, as well as a chapter called The Diseases of Women. There are many theories discussed in this chapter called The Diseases of Women, including the belief that the female body behaved in different ways and required different set of therapies. However, these men didn't study women's bodies or examine them or treat women's illnesses. It was completely arm's length. So their ability to diagnose and understand diseases and illness in women mainly came from secondhand sources like midwives. They had no direct knowledge in the understanding of the inner workings of a woman's body. So with this in mind, it's a little strange to think that the corpus remained a standard piece of medical authority until about the 1800s. And this is why I'm going back this far in history. The Hippocratic beliefs and assumptions regarding women's bodies and health have cast a very long shadow and have influenced much of healthcare throughout the ages. So, what did they believe? While the female body is defined as being different, they're not wrong. We certainly have different anatomy, but they also defined it as weaker. And this helped fuel the idea that women's biology made them less rational than men. They also thought that women suffered diseases that are mainly gynecological in nature. They thought that menstrual blood could make men sick, ruin crops, and drive dogs wild. Women who had intercourse with men were healthier than those who did not, and having intercourse often prevented and cured many diseases. So women, there's no excuse, there's no migraine, I'm not tonight, honey, I'm having a migraine. It's no, we can cure it. And semen was thought to believe to be have restorative healing powers. However, for men at this time, intercourse was deemed to be sexually injurious. So it was not of benefit to them, but they had to do their duty, right? Young women who reached the age of marriage but remained unmarried were believed to suffer the most during menstruation, and the only cure was not intercourse, but marriage, so that she could have intercourse and lose her virginity and have access to those male restorative healing powers. The Hippocratics believed that women were defined as overtly wet because they had too much blood in their system, and that is why they menstruated. And of course, probably the most widely known belief is that all women suffered from a disease known as the wandering womb. Hippocratic medicine believed that the absence of heterosexual intercourse would cause the uterus to dry up, making it lighter. And within this state of lightness, the womb would then travel and move around the body in search of a moister place. When the uterus came into contact with other organs, it caused pain and suffering and caused an illness called hysterical suffocation of the uterus. This was considered to be a disease that manifested itself with varying physical symptoms in response to the uterus's trap location in the body. Now, while this idea might sound a little bit ridiculous, I really had to question and ask myself, were they onto something? Were they somehow ahead of their time? Because this disease sounds very reminiscent of endometriosis, which is a disease where tissue that is similar to the uterine lining grows outside of the uterus, attaches itself to organs, and sheds during menstruation, causing immense pain to those who suffer from this disease. So were they really onto something? Maybe. I'm not really sure. They maybe just had a very good guess because, again, remember, they didn't actually study women. They only got secondhand sources. So while this wandering womb and hysterical suffocation may seem like a bizarre medical condition, it's really not as bizarre as its treatment. So depending on the physician or the philosopher of the time, the cures varied. Sexual intercourse was, of course, one option, but others believed that the womb had a weakness, and that was fragrant smells. It could be lured back into place with appeasing scents, and it would flee from pungent ones. Physicians would use fragrant liquids and balms and sponges made of wool to help draw that uterus back down and into place. This is a weird one. Another physician thought that fumigation was a good idea, and he suggested that blacksmith bellows be inserted into the vagina to blow fragrant smells into the body cavity. Bad smells would also be placed near the mouth, and the act of sneezing would force the uterus back into place. In fact, sneezing was a very common treatment for a long time. So if you had a difficult labor, all you needed was a good sneeze. If you had a late period, a sneeze, a seizure, a sneeze. They thought that the explosive force helped cure many disorders that affected women. Another cure was also the banging of metal plates, and this huge racket would cause the uterus to flee back into its rightful place. Physicians and philosophers of this period set the foundation of medicine, its definitions, theories, protocols, and the guidelines for the classification of diseases in women for centuries. So when the medieval period came around, not much had changed in the way of medical thinking. In medieval Europe, menstruation became connected to something called humoral theory, which was the idea that the body is made of four major fluids or humors, one of which was blood. So if you had too much of one humor, it led to disease. And it was around this time that bloodletting became a very common way to get the body's humors back into balance. So of course, because women of a certain age bleed monthly, this led many medieval doctors to believe that anyone who menstruated was in some way sick, and that women were largely responsible for the transmission of diseases because of this illness. These ideas were stressed in the late 13th century treatise called On the Secrets of Women. Now, while this book did, it had some good points, it did try and explain, how sperm and embryos are made, how to prevent pregnancy, wandering wombs, and more. It really did cause a lot of harm and a lot of harmful legacies that we do still have today. It transformed medical philosophy into misogyny and deemed women as toxic and largely responsible for the transmission of diseases. As an example, the anonymous author of this text believed that during menstruation, women could poison animals with a glance, dirty the cleanest mirror with their reflection, infect children, and transmit cancer and leprosy to men. This book also produced many negative and fantastically wrong beliefs about menstruation. Though menstruation is no longer thought to make women venomous, the legacy that periods are taboo, dirty, gross, and shameful stems from the ideas that were laid out in this book. Women to this day are taught to hide menstrual products from view and are discouraged from discussing periods in mixed company. Menstruation is also used as a tool against women to accuse them of being irrational and incapable or hysterical. On the Secrets of Women was a popular text for centuries, and notions like if a hair taken from a menstruating woman is planted, a serpent will grow from it. It all provided fuel for the witch hunts in the preceding centuries. In fact, this book is directly sourced in Malleus Maleficarum, which is a book that explains how to find and punish sorcery. But what does this book on witchcraft have to do with women's health? Quite simply, women became blamed for all other people's illnesses. If a physician couldn't identify the cause of a disease, it meant that the devil did it, and witches, who were mainly women at the time, helped the devil carry out his work. In one case, Elizabeth Jackson was accused of bewitching a 14-year-old young lady. Apparently, Elizabeth ran into this young girl and swore and threatened her and wished death upon her, all because of her clothing. I know women can sometimes be catty, but maybe not back then. We didn't have, social media, throwing stuff at us and making us buy all these crazy things. So it's kind of a stretch in terms of, all because of her clothing. That evening, the young lady began convulsing, and her throat and her neck began to swell. The doctor believed that she actually had tonsillitis, but he couldn't find any physical evidence to support his diagnosis. So he concluded that she was possessed and she was accused, and Elizabeth was accused of witchcraft. It was also at this time that the previous notion of hysterical suffocation of the uterus, a disease, became hysteria and synonymous with many manifestations of physical and psychological illnesses in women. Initially, hysterical women became subjected to exorcisms because it was considered a cure and not a punishment. The young girl that Elizabeth apparently bewitched underwent an exorcism to actually cure her tonsillitis. But as these witch trials raged on, symptoms of hysteria would become confused with sorcery. Women were accused of being witches for really any perceived abnormal behavior, and they were tortured and killed for it. But what exactly is hysteria? It's almost impossible to define hysteria in a way that many physicians to this day find acceptable. The meaning changed dramatically over the centuries, but it seems that the only definitive diagnosis of hysteria was having a uterus. So are you a woman? Yes, then seek emergency medicine right away because you are sick. Arguably, it would have been more difficult to find a symptom that was not indicative of hysteria than to list one that was. Symptoms range from, swollen abdomen, chest pain, excessive emotion, increased or decreased sex drive, damned if you do, damned if you don't, increased appetite, increased heart rate, hallucinations, being overly dramatic, blindness, seizures, fainting, muscle spasms, nervousness, anything that you could think of was really classified as hysteria. Hysteria was used to explain a wide variety of what we now know to be normal reproductive functions, assertive behaviors and emotions, as well as actual clinical symptoms for other diseases and conditions. Ultimately, doctors began to believe that the cause was psychological and all in a woman's head. This one size fits all diagnosis caused physicians to dismiss legitimate diseases and their pain and attributed their cause to hysteria. Take, for example, the 77-year-old woman from Liverpool who died in 1807 after enduring pain for 50 years. She is just known simply as JS in medical research. She was deemed healthy apart from the occasional hysterical affection that was so common among women. She was married at 27, was pregnant 1 year later. Her labor was difficult and her first child was stillborn. After childbirth, she contracted a fever, leaving her weak, and 1 year later, she discovered a lump in her pelvis. This lump was an infected abscess and it swelled so much that it burst inside of her. For the next 20 years, JS had nausea, breathing problems, fevers, heart palpitations, and unbearable pelvic pain. As she neared the end of her life, she could barely speak, move, or breathe. She asked her physician, John Rutter, to make sure that a surgeon performed an autopsy upon her death to try and figure out what was wrong. And what they found was a blistered uterus, damage to her colon, an egg-sized tumor in her abdomen, gangrene of the labia and anus, and a cyst between her rectum and uterus. Yet despite all of this, Dr. Rutter deemed that her pain was imagined. He wrote, "She was mistaken in her belief of the source of her pain. It appears most probable to me that she was hysterical." Today, many clinicians still act as though a woman's physical symptoms are exaggerated or arise from emotional or mental disturbance. And this dismissal at times can have devastating effect on women's health. With hysteria being deemed a catch-all diagnosis, I assume that almost every woman diagnosed in Western medicine would have been told that they were suffering from hysteria. So, with so many women being diagnosed, what was the cure? Well, there were a few that were quite strange, but the most talked about one is actually physician-assisted orgasm. This treatment has actually been debunked in recent scholarship, despite the fact that anywhere you search, it absolutely happened. Unfortunately, there's no proof in any kind of medical text or in papers or newspaper, nothing, because if a doctor is going to lead a woman to orgasm, you would think that at the time, especially in the 1800s, the Puritans of the time would be rebelling against that. And with so many women suffering from hysteria, there has to be some record somewhere, and there isn't. And so the reason why it's kind of snowballed is that in 1999, there was a publication titled The Technology of Orgasm. And the author did claim that Victorian physicians routinely treated female hysteria patients with vibrators. And like I said, it spread through popular culture and has been circulating ever since. In fact, many physicians, most of them believe that too many orgasms caused hysteria and that masturbation was viewed as seriously injurious and potentially fatal. So it's strange to me that for centuries that heterosexual intercourse was a cure for many women's diseases, and now suddenly it was so forbidden. And to prevent women from being hysterical, some doctors even treated hysteria with clitorectomies, which is the surgical removal of the clitoris in order to actually prevent orgasm. Other doctors, like a Canadian psychiatrist, Richard Maurice Buck, opted to perform invasive surgery such as hysterectomies to cure female patients of their hysteria. There was also a trend amongst surgeons to remove healthy ovaries. What doctors didn't realize is that these unassuming organs at the time were in fact fundamentally supporting women's well-being. And eventually, with the discovery of estrogen, scientists were able to piece together that the ovaries contributed to women's health. Hydrotherapy was also used. Patients were submerged or sprayed with high pressure jets. The idea was that cold water would somehow just shock the hysteria right out of them. And of course, another great one is spinning therapy, which involves strapping patients to a rotating platform and just spinning them around until they were dizzy and nauseous. Because apparently, being dizzy and nauseous is better than being hysterical. Of course, some cures were more pharmacological in nature. Women could be prescribed pills made from dried up animal brain matter or bone marrow. And Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound was also a cure-all for many female complaints. Following the First World War, hysteria as a diagnosis started to slowly fall out of favor. And while the reason behind this isn't fully known, it may be because doctors were realizing that the mental health traumas exhibited by demobilized soldiers was very similar to the symptoms of hysteria. Instead of men receiving a hysteria diagnosis, soldiers and veterans were diagnosed with shell shock, or what today we might call PTS and or PTSD. Many cases of hysteria were actually explained by other medical or psychological disorders, and by the 1970s and the 1980s, hysteria was officially removed as a medical classification. Unfortunately, its legacy is still going strong and is very much responsible for obstacles that women have to overcome to receive medical treatment. Some of these lingering ramifications include women having their symptoms written off as being all in their heads. Today, women are deemed depressed, neurotic, anxious, nervous, and yes, still hysterical when they report pain, especially chronic pain. When women report symptoms from diseases like endometriosis, polycystic ovary syndrome, or even fibroids, they are likely to be offered minor tranquilizers and antidepressants instead of typical pain medication, even though some women's endometriosis pain has been described as painful as a heart attack and as giving birth. So just imagine having that pain several days per month for years and years and years. And with this pain, women are still expected to, go to work, raise children, carry out their daily lives. The notion of just take an Advil, pop an Advil and go is still very much widely believed within the community. And so one of the most difficult parts for women who suffer from, these serious chronic health conditions is that they have to try and convince their doctors and others of what they are experiencing is real. And it's not often connected to, general reproductive functions. There are so many stories of women on social media who go and say that they have like varying symptoms that, hair loss, cramping, migraines, chronic pain. Like just think of the story of JS and that pain within their stomachs and in their backs, and their doctors are just like, well, you're a woman, like just expect it. Like there's nothing we can do. And then they come back after years of pushing for, more testing, and they comes back with it. They have cancer. So when medical professionals minimize and really diminish and ignore these health issues or perceive a patient's symptoms as not being credible enough to warrant action and they convince them of this is medical gaslighting. This is not something that's, a one off. This happens all the time. And, why is it still happening in the 20th century? And, can it all be chalked up to hysteria? Well, gaslighting certainly can be, but there's unfortunately a lot of gender bias, sorry, in Western medical systems that can be traced back to the time of Hippocrates. In ancient societies, women were often viewed as incomplete males or as having inverted male sex organs. And by framing the female body as an underdeveloped male body, Western medicine has actually deemed males as the baseline for all human health, research, education, and practice. This notion, coupled with the legacy of hysteria, means that our healthcare system doesn't fully comprehend how diseases and their symptoms affect women differently. Males and females are fundamentally different on a biological scale. So, how are we still in this cycle? Research suggests that women are actually more likely than men to be on the receiving end of medical misdiagnosis or delayed diagnosis when they describe symptoms that differ from the male norm. I very recently actually had to recertify my first aid, and when they were talking about symptoms of a heart attack, they described symptoms that were entirely from the male experience. The typical, crushing chest pain, tingling in the arms, but women experience jaw pain. They experience pain and pressure in their backs and nausea and more. And then we've got to teach people that this is happening. And because if we don't, then we just dismiss. And what ends up happening is a staggering 78% of women in Canada are actually misdiagnosed when they're having a heart attack, and 33% are more likely to be misdiagnosed following a stroke. These are detrimental, diseases and illnesses that happen to women, and they're just being brushed aside. Women, like I just said, women have different symptoms of a heart attack, meaning that they're, initially dismissed as, oh, you've got anxiety. Oh, maybe you just have the flu because you have nausea. Or they're completely overlooked altogether. And unfortunately, we're in this sad cycle that we cannot escape from. Women are just deemed hysterical, or that what they're feeling is all in their heads because we don't understand the presentation of an illness for their biology. And it certainly seems like we're not getting out of this kind of idea anytime soon, especially in 2024. What is also incredibly frustrating is that women make up 75% of those suffering from an autoimmune disease. Let me say that again, 75% of people with an autoimmune disease are female. You can see on the slide here, 10 to 1, they have Hashimoto's disease. 3 to 1 scleroderma, 2.5 to 1 rheumatoid arthritis. And the issue is that many symptoms of these autoimmune diseases are non-specific. Sometimes women just don't feel well, or they're experiencing aches and pains or symptoms that maybe overlap with other issues, which is why it can take an average of 5 years for an autoimmune condition in a woman to be diagnosed. I, which is not entirely surprising, since conditions with inexplicable symptoms fall under the category of hysteria. They're not necessarily taken seriously for, legitimate medical conditions. When you have overlapping pain or you're just not feeling well, again, it goes back to, it's just all in your head. You don't have too many symptoms. I can't really find anything wrong with you. And the same thing happens with a lot of gynecological conditions like polycystic ovary syndrome and endometriosis. The non-specificity of some of these symptoms make it all too easy to brush off women as being dramatic or hysterical. And for those who have these experiences, it's incredibly invalidating because before a woman's pain is taken seriously as a symptom of a possible disease, it first has to be validated and believed by a medical professional. And women have to convince them that what they are experiencing is real. And this often forces them not to seek out physicians or to seek out multiple specialists before receiving a proper diagnosis. Again, sometimes years after the onset of symptoms. Imagine suffering from debilitating symptoms for years until you finally get a diagnosis and maybe even medication to help treat that. It would also be an inadequate exploration into this subject without really acknowledging other social identities that contribute to the kind of care or lack of care that women receive. Our Western healthcare system has also failed Black, Asian, Latina, the LGBTQS plus communities, as well as other diverse people who experience far greater health disparities than white women. Black women are more susceptible to receiving less pain medication, as Black patients are believed to have thicker skin than white patients. A 2019 study also found that Black patients were 40% less likely to receive medications for acute pain and 34% less likely to be prescribed opioids. In Canada, Indigenous women have experienced high levels of racism when health workers make assumptions about their life experiences, which is another ongoing impact of colonization. According to a BC women's health study, they state previous and ongoing traumas and whether care feels safe are also contributing factors to accessing healthcare. Because of negative experiences related to the impacts of colonization, many Indigenous women do not trust healthcare providers. And to be honest, no wonder. Since the establishment of the Indian Act in 1867, there remain many discriminatory and inequitable practices and policies that negatively affect the health of Indigenous women. And this includes, they've had forced or coerced sterilization as well as birth alerts. In 2020, the government actually announced that they were ending birth alerts, but in 2022, women out west were still stating that birth alerts were happening. And this is where a medical professional states that an Indigenous woman may be perceived to not be able to care for her born child. And so what happens is when she gives birth to it, they actually take the child away, which is very much kind of a little reminiscent of the 60s scoop that was going on. Even accessing a doctor in Canada is also challenging for everyone these days. But imagine being a woman and trying to access healthcare. You finally get an appointment only to be told your symptoms are all in your head, or that what you're feeling is part of just being a woman and having a period. But deep down that something is wrong. Maybe you're a single parent or you work a part-time minimum wage job, and now you have to take another day off work to sit in a walk-in clinic, losing out on much needed income. Or maybe you live in a northern community and there aren't many medical professionals around, or you don't have transportation to get to an appointment. All of these social and economic factors affect how women interact with the healthcare system. And so, in this way, each woman's experience is as individual as she is. Despite women making up nearly 50% of our global population, they have been excluded from clinical trials and research. This means that our understanding of how medicine interacts with female biology or research or how diseases affect women differently stems from the fact that men have been the baseline for all health and treatment for centuries. Scientists believe that male subjects provide more favorable outcomes because hormonal functions in women are actually believed to distort results. In 1977, the FDA in the United States actually banned women of childbearing age from participating in early drug trials to protect their ability to procreate. This new policy was a result of a valid concern following the thousands of babies that were born with birth defects following pregnant patients taking thalidomide. However, omitting such a large group of participants can have real life consequences. As an example, 20 years after Ambien hit the market, the FDA required that the manufacturer reduce the dose for women because studies showed that women metabolize the medication differently, and so that they were having, struggle waking up after taking this medication. And we do know that women metabolize medication differently than men. So side effects and even getting, correct dosing for medication can vary depending on your biological sex. And this is why the BC Women's Health Foundation says underrepresentation in clinical trials may explain why women experience 50 to 75% of adverse drug reactions in Canada. But many of the medications that are prescribed to women are often only tested on men. It was only in the 1990s that there started to be laws in Western countries, sorry, that required female participation in medical trials. 1990s, 30 years ago. And surprisingly, Canada actually only recommends their participation. It is not required by law in order to get drugs passed here in Canada. Despite the advances in healthcare over the last few decades, there are still gaps in research pertaining to women's health. Only 7% of the Canadian Institute of Health's research new investigator awards were for research on women's health. Endometriosis affects about 1 million people in Canada. That's diagnosed. Remember, it takes a while to get the diagnosis, so I'm sure that number is actually much higher. So the Canadian Institute of Health only provided about $7.3 million in funding to research this painful and often debilitating disease. That's per every woman who suffers from endometriosis, they pay $7.30 to help treat their disease. I'm sure women who are suffering from this disease would probably be willing to pay more than $7.30 to help try and find a better cure or pain management for something like this. Women's heart disease is also extremely underfunded and under-researched, despite the fact that globally, heart disease is actually the leading cause of death in women. These statistics show that there is an urgent need for a greater focus on women's health to understand distinctions between men and women in the presentation, diagnosis, treatment, medication, and management of health to ensure that the healthcare needs of women and girls are met. But how do we do this? In 2023, the Canadian federal government struck a parliamentary committee to explore the study of women's health across the country. Great, that's a great thing to do. Unfortunately, 11 of the 12 members of this committee were men. This obviously had significant backlash and has since been changed to include more women. If we want to make these major advances and changes in women's health and how they access healthcare, we need to make sure that women are involved in every level, whether it be government, research, funding, education, and more. Their participation is vital in in order to overcome these inequities that we currently have. The sad part of my talk today is that honestly, like I could keep going with stories with inequity in women's health. Stories of how enslaved women were forced to be experimented on, or really how birth control has been a 50-plus-year-long drug trial, or our lack of understanding of how menopause affects women, or the social barriers that women face to even access healthcare, and even women's mental health. But unfortunately, I have to stop myself, um, which I would love to keep going, but I don't think I'd be allowed to go for, a whole day's lecture. But what I do hope that you take away today is really how rooted these systemic problems are in history. And that by elevating the importance of women's health across our entire health industry, we can hopefully deliver better, more inclusive data and insights, more targeted, accessible, and equitable solutions to ultimately enable better care for women worldwide. Today, I do want to end my talk with a definition. The definition is of health by the World Health Organization, which is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well being, and not merely the absence of disease. Based on this definition and everything that we have learned today, women have for centuries experienced serious inequities that impact their physical, their mental, and their emotional well being just because they are a woman. So, with this in mind, I do hope that you come away with a greater understanding of maybe your own health if you identify as a woman, and that what you are experiencing is not just happening to you, it's happening to millions of people, not just in Canada, but around the world. It's a systemic problem that many people with a uterus face. Or perhaps today's talk will allow you to empower others in your life, like mothers, sisters, friends, daughters, with what you have learned so that you can offer them support while they are going through these trying times in our medical industry. Thank you everyone so much for joining today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Shawna, for that very informative talk. I was there for the first one, and it's just as good this time, so well done to you. So I'm just going to see if we have questions. If anyone does have questions, please put it into the Q&A section. I'm just going to give me a moment, Shawna, to see. No questions yet, but lots of great comments. Gail Benefield said, wow, great graphics and historical and scientific information. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I was shocked to see how many people are actually in today's talk. Oh, I love that, Dana, mentioning the lack of information about menopause. 100% menopause is extremely under-researched. I was actually just having a conversation recently about with a coworker here, actually, and I was shocked to learn that I'm almost in my mid-30s. I know I look great. But I realized that I could be in premenopause as of next year because premenopause usually hits about 10 years beforehand. And so why isn't this taught to girls in, high school? Why aren't we taught to recognize maybe when we need to start thinking about menopause and when we should start recognizing the symptoms of that? Because guess what? We can go to our doctors now and we can get medication to help us treat symptoms. I mean, frozen shoulder, the migraines, the hot flashes. Why do women have to suffer through all of these when, research should be done to help, balance our hormones? Because guess what? These hormones are with us all of our lives and then they just go away. Like, we can't just expect that the loss of that is just, well, we'll just move along. We'll be normal. We'll be fine. It's not, because people experience difficulties with menopause when they hit it. So there needs to be a lot more conversation and research into that.
Definitely. Let's see.
Yeah, Ruth, that I hear that a lot.
You saw that with Ruth, the night sweats started when she was 35.
Yeah, and it's just over and over again. Yeah, you're normal, you're fine. No, we need to be recognizing this. So Ooh,
Oh,
Babs.
we've got a question here. So from Babs, did you look at some of the controversial science discovered from experiments on women in concentration camps?
Absolutely. Women in concentration camps were, underwent forced sterilization. That was a very common thing. There were a lot of women that were experimented on. I believe they called them rabbits, is my understanding of that. And doctors would, try on them to how do we take, a leg from a deceased person? So I'm going to cut off her leg, and I'm going to try and transplant a leg onto this individual. And they did it on women, on, of course, Jewish women in concentration camps. There's a lot more research I did years ago, because again, I did this talk last year, but I would love to explore that topic actually a little bit more, because it is something that we do need to draw more attention to, and how women were still experimented on, really. Ooh.
So we're getting lots of some personal stories too coming
Yeah.
through, which is thank you to everyone who's sharing some stories of your experiences, especially one who had mentioned that a gynecologist said painful periods were because they were Catholic.
What?
And she was finally diagnosed with endometriosis after exploratory surgery. Can you believe that, eh? Um, and a few people, someone who's researching the non-consensual medical experimentation at Mercer Reformity. Ooh, that's coming out funny. In Toronto. So, wow, thank you. I'm sure you'll have lots of to share as well from your research. And yes, there should be a book on the subject, Adrian.
Yeah, there's a lot of really great books available. I will recommend Unwell Women. I can't remember her first name. Her last name is Cleghorn. Her book is absolutely wonderful. Was a basis for a lot of the starting points, jumping points for my research. And there's actually a new one that came out this year that I saw. There's an article in the New York Times about this book, and I can't remember what it's called, but again, it explores this idea of, women's health disparities, and it being rooted so much in history, that I still would love to pick up and read, just to learn a little bit more as well.
Certainly, I did a medical history course in my undergrad many, many moons ago, and it was one of the most fascinating classes. I find medical history very interesting, and I worked with the medical collection, the heritage collection at Western too. And I mean, just looking at the tools and learning about the history of how things were used and the ideas that they had of treating any condition is just boggles your mind today.
Hmm.
So thank you everyone for your comments, and I appreciate you joining us today. So this is our last virtual lecture. Our next lecture will be in person, and this lecture series is sponsored by Jeff and Lorraine Joyner. And the next one is on March 21st, and it is Dr. Brian Pyhack, and it's on the solar eclipse. So if you have any interest at all, make sure you sign up right away, because our list is already at about 70 people. You do get a free pair of the solar eclipse glasses for that event as well. It's $10 if you're a non-member. Also, our Doc Club meets this Friday morning online, and it is for Women's History Month. So if you're interested in joining that group, please contact Barbara Worthy at the museum. So the documentaries this week are on women as well. So if there's no other questions, thank you all again for joining us, and feel free to come into the museum. We are open free to the public from 1 to 5 for today and tomorrow. Anyone from the Niagara region, please come and join us. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.